Heart is offering you what we are calling a few-minute warming. These inspirational words may be just what you need to change the outcome of your life. Join us for a warming to fill your heart.
We are to be the heart of Jesus to the world today. And one story where we find it the best, maybe the best, is in the story of the Good Samaritan. The road from Jerusalem to Jericho was a very treacherous road. It was a little less than 20 miles going from a high mountain to a deepest valley. And even in 5th century, St. Jerome called it the Bloody Way because notoriously the robbers would hang out on those cliffs and on those turns and attack people, the pedestrians that would come by. So, as we look at the characters in the very familiar story, the Good Samaritan, let me comment briefly on each of them to just shed some light, to open it up. And you can see, again, who is the cast of characters today. That's what we always want to say. We know the drama of the Good Samaritan is going on. We know it is. Every story is timeless. So who's the traveler? Well, the traveler is that person we say, well, could you imagine somebody hitchhiking? I mean, they should have asked for it. I mean, come on. The person's foolish, like a hitchhiker today. They're not taking precautions. You would not travel that road from Jerusalem to Jericho carrying any money on your person. So that person was foolish. And who was the priest? Well, I've often thought of that. There was a law that was written in the Jewish text, the Talmud, that you should not touch a dead man. And maybe the priest looked at this victim on the road and thought he could well be dead. He looked dead. He didn't move, no doubt. And if he touched him, that would make the priest unclean. And he had set a good example. And besides, if he was unclean, you would be for 7 days, according to the Jewish law, which means he would miss his turn in the temple, and how would he explain it to his people? In other words, it may be the Jewish priest chose religious ceremony over charity. I wonder how often we are the priest on the road. How often our religious obligations get in the way of the religious obligation of love. And who is the Levite? Well, the Levite could well have been a very sensible man. Knowing that bandits would hang out on this road and act as decoys, even as we hear frightening stories today. You know, the one would hide behind the rocks, the other would act as though he was dead. You come up to help the poor guy and you get jumped helping him. We hear stories like that in newspapers. So the Levite might have been this sensible man who chose safety over charity. Who could blame him for that? Jesus is just telling the story, though. And this Samaritan, as Jesus is telling the story, and he would say, now Samaritan, the Jewish people would have heard this and said, here comes the villain. Because when they heard Samaritan, they heard the enemy. To say Good Samaritan was in fact a contradiction of terms. They never went together. Samaritans were always unfaithful to the law, like the tax collectors. They were unfaithful, they marriage, they mixed blood, they were not God's chosen people. They were the enemy. So, what's the story mean? What's the message? The message was told, this story, in response to the question, and who, Lord, is my neighbor? And the Jews believed in the commandment, love thy neighbor as thyself. Jesus was quoting Leviticus when he told that commandment. And yet they thought neighbor, translating in their comfort, was their fellow Jew. They never imagined their neighbor was the one they hated. And Jesus says, and you must love everyone. Everyone is my neighbor. Everyone.
We thank you for accessing the Heart to Heart app. Please return again to hear inspiration that may make you laugh or even cry, but most importantly, bring you closer to your Savior, Jesus Christ.